Time to start cleaning out the stash! Welcome to part 1 of my nifty cosplay from Hazbin Hotel, and today we're gonna tackle the petticoat. I pulled up Kara Lee Cosplay's tutorial on how to do a petticoat, but I did have to make some modifications for one major reason. I was working with a limited amount of tulle. And if there's one thing you need to know about this project, I'm trying to make it on a cheap budget. My first thought was to dye this white tulle that I had, however, that turned out to be an epic fail. So I had to chuck that idea out of the way and reluctantly made my way to my local Michael's and pick up some more red tulle. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. My first thought was to gather the tulle using my ruffler foot that I used when I did Princess Tutu, and even though I bought this from my old machine, it luckily worked with my new one. I then began measuring and cutting out all the tulle that I need. I'm going for a 3-layer petticoat with 3 tiers in different widths of 60 inches, 3 yards, and 9 yards. I then gathered and sewed up the orange layer and then repeated the process for the 2 red layers. Why am I having a red and an orange layers? Because I'm trying to use up all my stash. However, at this point, the ruffler foot was actually kind of being a problem, so I switched back to doing a regular gathering stitch. And that turned out a little bit better, I guess. I then pinned all the layers together in one tangled mess and then sewed them together. And then I had 3 fluffy layers of petticoat. I then arranged them in a red-orange-red fashion, cut a waistband out of leftover twill, attached the waistband to all 3 layers of the petticoat, and then inserted an elastic waistband. The very last thing that I had to do was close up the waistband, and with that, my nifty petticoat was done. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how the petticoat turned out. I know it's not a part of the official design, but since her dress needed some poof, I decided to just go ahead and make a petticoat myself. Stay tuned for the next part. Bye! Ooh, okay, let's get into this. Welcome to part 2 of my nifty cosplay from Hazbin Hotel, and today we're going to tackle the undershirt and the gloves. Now, you're probably wondering, what undershirt? Well, the reason why I'm doing an undershirt is because of Nifty's black arms. You see, I don't really want to do like an opera length glove because that takes a ton of effort to pull on and off. So what I'm doing instead is making a little crop top and then adding black long sleeves onto it. So that way my arms will stay black no matter what, and then I can just wear short gloves that are much easier to pull off. Which, speaking of which, let's start with those. I bought an acrylic nail set online for $5.81, and because I didn't have black nail polish on me, I just used black acrylic paint. However, to make sure I still get that nail polish shine, I went over it with clear nail polish. While I let that dry, let's go ahead and do the actual gloves. I made a pattern just simply by tracing my hand, and then I traced it onto black stretch fabric. I then just sewed around the outline, and once that was done, I had a lovely little glove that I could sandwich my hands through. Once I was satisfied with the fit, I carefully cut around the edges, making sure to not cut the seams. And then I turned the gloves inside out. Now to attach the nails. Okay, this was quite the ordeal. I put on a rubber glove to protect my nails from getting glue on it, and then my first try was to use E6000. And by the way, wear a respirator for this because this stuff is toxic. However, that did not really adhere very well. My next tactic was to try to use tacky glue because I just didn't want to be breathing in the fumes. And then I wrapped my fingers in painter's tape to really put the nails down. And then I just waited about like 45 minutes to let the glue set. But once again, when I took the tape off, it came off. I finally decided to do a tactic that I've seen people do with armor, which is sew little bits of craft foam and then attach them with contact cement. Once again, please use a respirator for this. And that seemed to finally do the trick in keeping these nails locked. I then used a black fabric marker to try to get rid of some of the glue stains as well as hide the white foam. And with that, my undershirt and my gloves were done. I'm so glad I decided to use short gloves for this because with these nails, it's so hard to maneuver. Stay tuned for the next part. If you're a beginner cosplayer wanting to do nifty, please don't do what I did. Welcome to part 3 of my nifty cosplay from Hazbin Hotel, and today we're going to tackle the wig. My base wig was a bit unconventional. It's an old two-tone wig that I was gonna use for another project. But the first thing I did was chop off the back of the entire black section because for the first time, I'm gonna try to make a cosplay helmet. I first began by gluing some leftover batting to the back of the wig. And make sure you do this on a wig that is custom to fit your head because this is not gonna work otherwise. And then I went over it with my heat gun and then covered the entire back in stretchy red fabric. My original plan was to do the whole wire, tape, and covered in wefts thing, but after realizing I had nowhere near enough wefts to do that, I bit the bullet and bought a cheapo wig off of Amazon. And when I say cheap, I mean really cheap. Instead of cutting and styling this wig, I cut this wig apart so that way I could harvest the wefts. And then I one by one glued it all in using a combination of the wig and the wefts that I had on hand. These were some leftover wefts that I had when I made Shiranui. And when I say harvested, I really meant it because in addition to the pre-made wefts that I had to make even more wefts using the leftover wefts I chopped from the base. The last thing I did was glue the top portion of the harvested wig, and then I began by doing what I did with the rest of the wig, which is cutting, shaping, and curling. To create Nifty's blonde streak, I grabbed even more wefts that I had in my stash, glued it to the bottom, and then cut and styled them. All that was left was some final touches. The only thing I really did was mainly crimp the top just to give it a little bit more volume and to tease and curl it a little bit more at the top. And with that, after a whole lot of wefts that have been chopped off, my nifty wig was finally done. Like I said, not beginner friendly. If you're a beginner, just get a pre-made wig.
Adobe King Roach.
Welcome to part 4 of my Nifty cosplay from Hazbin Hotel, and today we're going to tackle something special, Nifty's Roach Crown. The only 2 materials I need, brown pipe cleaner, and a packet of fake cockroaches. Oh, and some glue. First thing I'm going to do is twist 2 pipe cleaners together, and then twist them again to form a circle. Feel free to adjust this for whatever head size you need. Next, twist 1 ends of 2 more pipe cleaners together, and then weave that pipe cleaner in and out of the loop that I already made. Once they're fully woven through, twist the other ends together. Then go ahead and adjust it to make it a little more branchy. Then take the cockroaches and just hot glue them on. Feel free to put on as many or as little as you want. And once you're all done with that, the Roach Crown is done. If you're going to ALA, I actually made 2 of these that I will be giving out to any Alistair or Hazbin Hotel cosplayers. And if you can't get a crown, I also have a ribbon to give out. Stay tuned for more info on how to get those. Can you guess what this is made out of? Welcome to part 5 of my Nifty cosplay from Hazbin Hotel, and today we're going to tackle the dress. I created a pattern from my sloper pattern that I use a lot, and all of my fabrics were pretty much stash fabrics, including a whole bunch of dinner napkins. Yeah, all the red bits you see on this costume, dinner napkins. I laid out all my patterns as best as I could, although I had to ignore some gray lines, and began creating things like the apron, the sleeves, and of course, the top. I even had to get a little bit creative by piecing some of the scraps together, because at this point, I was running out of dinner napkins. Why I had a bunch of dinner napkins, it's a long story. Speaking of scraps, Nifty's bandana was also made out of a bandana that I got during COVID era, and I lined it with the fabric backdrop that I used for Omyoji. I just pretty much followed the shape of the original bandana, and ta-da, bandana for Nifty. To create the blood drops on Nifty's dress, I got a little creative. I made some circles on red felt and used sequins, hot fix rhinestones, and some leftover red beads in my stash. I don't know, kind of gave a cool sparkle effect. And to create the belt, I just took more fabric from the backdrop and sewed it onto the dress itself. Once that was done, I pinned the blood drops on as well, and then basically hand sewed everything on. The last detail was the little poodle thing. I printed out a picture of a poodle and then traced it onto some leftover black felt that I had. And then I just made a simple outline of it with red seed beads. These were leftover seed beads from when I did Hikaru from Imaginary Earth. And it came out something like this. To create the little trail thing that goes all over the dress, I first marked out where I wanted to go with heat erase pen, and then just did a long running stitch using embroidery floss. I went over it with an iron to get rid of the ink marks, and then I hand sewed the poodle patch on. And with that, my Nifty cosplay dress was done. Truthfully, I could probably add things like a prop, but I'm running out of time for ALA, so I'm gonna stop Nifty right here. See you guys soon.